The chapel smelled faintly of lilies and dust, the scent of endings. Mara stood before her father's casket, her eyes fixed on the polished mahogany that reflected the blurred forms of her whispering relatives. They clustered like vultures, voices slithering between hymns. He left her nothing, not even the watch. She didn't flinch. Outside, the rain drummed a rhythm that only she seemed to hear. Her father's favorite piano piece, playing somewhere beyond the veil of sound and grief. The lawyer sat in the back row, his briefcase balanced on his knees, face unreadable. Mara's hands tightened around a single white rose. She thought of his last words. "They'll think it's over before it begins." The priest's eulogy blurred into a low hum as her mind drifted through fragments of childhood. Laughter by the sea, her father's voice teaching her to look storms in the eye. She whispered almost inaudibly, "I will." The room was small, paneled in oak, thick with tension. The lawyer unfolded the document with mechanical precision. "This will is straightforward," he began, eyes flicking toward Mara, then away. Her cousins leaned forward, anticipation flickering like static. Her Aunt Pearls, tight against her throat, smirked faintly. Each line stripped away pieces of her father's legacy, passing homes, accounts, and heirlooms to everyone but her. The air felt heavy, oxygen thinning with every word. Mara sat still, her pulse slow, remembering her father's cryptic smile when he said, "Don't listen to the first ending." Flashback. Hospital room at dusk. The world reduced to the sound of a beeping monitor and the soft rasp of breathing. Her father's hand, thin, trembling, found hers. "They'll fight for what they don't deserve," he whispered. "But the truth will belong to you." The setting sun painted his face gold and shadow, half in life, half in farewell. Mara blinked back tears, memorizing the freckles by his temple. The scent of antiseptic mixed with jasmine. "When you hear the whispers," he said, smiling faintly, "remember, silence is a weapon." Back in the lawyer's office, the final paragraph was read. Mara's name appeared, attached to nothing but a line. "To my daughter, Mara, I leave the house by the sea." A ripple of derision passed through the room. Her cousin chuckled. Her aunt whispered, "A ruin? Perfect." The lawyer paused, then continued. The air thickened with inherited malice. Mara met each gaze in silence, her lips forming something unreadable. Not pain, not surrender. Something waiting. Just as the lawyer began to close the folder, he stopped. "There's one more line," he said softly. Whispers died. His eyes lifted toward Mara, then the others. "To those who wronged me, and know who they are, consider this my reckoning," murmurs rippled. "And to my daughter," he continued, "I leave what they have stolen. Once it returns to its rightful owner." Silence thickened. Her relatives stared, unease cutting through their certainty. Mara leaned back in her chair, a ghost of a smile on her lips. Her father's words thundered in memory. "They'll think it's over before it begins." Mara stood at the edge of the coastal road, the wind tearing through her coat as gulls wheeled above the cliffs. The house her father had left her loomed ahead, a gray, salt-bitten shape against a storm-heavy sky. Its windows were blank eyes, its porch sagged with the weight of time. Her relatives had called it worthless. She felt otherwise. The key turned reluctantly in the lock, and the door opened with a sigh, as though the house itself recognized her. The air inside carried the scent of cedar, rust and memory. Dust motes floated in fractured light. She whispered, "I'm home." And somewhere deep in the house, a floorboard creaked in reply. Later that night, she sat at her father's old oak desk, the only object untouched by decay. Her relatives had mocked her inheritance, calling it a monument to failure. Yet, as lightning flashed across the sea outside, she felt the pulse of something deliberate. as if the house itself was hiding a secret. The wallpaper peeled in slow curls, revealing fragments of handwriting beneath. Her breath caught. Someone, perhaps her father, had written directly onto the walls, words blurred but visible enough to read. Truth survives rot. By dawn, she had explored nearly every room. Behind a cracked wardrobe, she found a small metal box wrapped in oilcloth. Inside lay photographs, her father shaking hands with her uncles, smiling thinly beside ledgers and company seals. On the back of each photo, his handwriting marked dates and amounts. She felt her pulse quicken. These weren't memories, they were evidence. The betrayal she had always suspected was preserved here, waiting for her to claim it. Hours later, she spread the photographs and ledgers across the table. Lines of numbers ran like veins through the pages, silent testimony to years of deceit. Her father had documented everything. The uncles who mocked her had stolen from him long before his death. Mara pressed her fingers to the page, tracing the ink that had outlasted his breath. For the first time, her grief sharpened into purpose. The storm outside began to swell, and she felt its rhythm align with her heartbeat. As thunder rolled over the ocean, she found her father's signet, ring tucked inside the final ledger. It gleamed faintly in the lamplight. A small circle of gold, engraved with their family crest. Her throat tightened. She slipped it onto her finger, the metal cold against her skin. "You knew," she whispered. In that moment, the rage she had buried beneath sorrow began to surface. Quiet, deliberate, and unstoppable. The house seemed to breathe with her, walls creaking like a living witness. She stood, the ring glinting as lightning tore across the sea. The wind moaned through the cracked window frames as Mara sat amid the scattered documents, her eyes fixed on an old photograph of herself as a child. The edges were frayed, the image faded, her father smiling down at her, while two men stood behind, their expressions sharp and watchful. Memory bled into the present. She saw herself at 8, standing by the pier, overhearing words never meant for her. "Well, take care of it quietly." Her father's silence then had confused her. Now it spoke volumes. She rose from the floor, the photograph trembling in her hand. The betrayal had begun long before the funeral, and it was time for her to finish what he had started. She spread the ledgers before her, page after page marked with initials and amounts, transfers, false invoices, missing funds. Every line pointed to the same names. Her uncles. They had drained the family business until her father was forced to sell his shares for nothing. He had known. He had kept records. But why hide them here, in the house? Everyone had forgotten. Perhaps he had trusted that only she would understand what to do. Mara felt her pulse steady as she traced each signature, her father's handwriting interwoven with betrayal. Justice, she realized, was patient, and she would honor that patience. She remembered the journals her father kept, written in code, numbers hidden beneath phrases that seemed like poetry. She retrieved them from a drawer where they had lain untouched for years. One entry caught her attention. "The sea remembers the stolen ships." She turned the page and found coordinates scribbled in the margin. Her breath caught. The location matched the family's shipping docks, where the company's money had first disappeared. It was no longer coincidence. She closed the journal with deliberate calm, her mind already assembling the plan. That afternoon, Mara met with the lawyer in a quiet seaside cafe. The place smelled of coffee and rain-soaked wood. He had already guessed why she'd come. "You found it," he said, not asking, but knowing. She placed a single photograph and ledger page on the table between them. "They stole everything," she replied. His eyes softened, as though he had been waiting for this moment. "Then it's time we give them a reason to fear what they built." She nodded, slipping the documents back into her folder. "My father said the truth would belong to me. I think it's ready to come home." Night descended with the weight of a storm. The wind howled across the cliffs, rattling shutters like bones. Inside the house, Mara lit a single lamp beside the window and opened her father's final letter, sealed beneath the signet crest. The ink had faded, but the words burned clear. If you're reading this, then you already know. I couldn't save what they destroyed, but I could make sure you'd find the truth. Do what I couldn't. Tears blurred the letters. Outside, lightning fractured the sky, illuminating the sea below. Endless, furious, alive. She pressed her hand against the window and whispered, "I will, Father. I promise." Mara walked into her uncle's birthday gathering with the calm of a ghost returning to its home. The air buzzed with laughter, glasses clinking, and the shallow charm of people pretending to love one another. They hadn't expected her to come, the outcast with nothing to lose. She smiled softly when they turned to stare. Her uncle's eyes flickered, uneasy. "Didn't think you'd show," he muttered. "Neither did I," she replied, taking a glass of champagne from a passing tray. Every word, every step, was deliberate. Beneath her calm exterior, calculation thrummed. She had come not to mourn, not to forgive, but to begin. She mingled with ease, her voice measured, eyes sharp. Every smile she offered carried a hidden edge. Between sips of wine, she planted subtle phrases, the kind that spread like fire once whispered twice. Uncle Edward seemed distracted lately, she mused to a cousin. Strange how he's been visiting the bank so often. The cousin's brow furrowed. Later, Mara mentioned a missing account, a forgotten trust, a rumor of an audit. By the time Desir arrived, suspicion had already begun to take root. She excused herself, leaving a room full of polite laughter and poisoned curiosity. Later that evening, one of her cousins found her alone in the garden, rain drizzling through the branches. "You know something," he said, voice tense. Mara tilted her head, amused. "You think I'd tell you if I did?" He offered a folded envelope. "Money?" "You could make this easy," he whispered. She stared at the envelope, then at him. "Easy?" she repeated. "That's not what he taught me." Her tone was calm, almost kind, and it frightened him. When he left, she didn't touch the bribe. She only watched the paper darken under the falling rain until the ink bled away. The next morning, Mara played the recording on her phone. His bribe, his trembling voice, his confession that the uncles had moved funds offshore. Her reflection stared back from the dark glass screen, calm and unflinching. "Thank you," she murmured, saving the file to a hidden drive. The world outside her window was clear after the night's storm, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than thunder. The game was moving quickly now, pieces falling where she wanted them. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Revenge isn't noise. It's music," played slowly. By the end of the week, the first rumor broke in the papers. Whispers of financial misconduct, audits, disappearing assets. The family's perfect facade cracked. Her phone buzzed constantly, calls from cousins she ignored. She sat by the seaside window of the house her father had left her, watching waves collide with the rocks below. The wind howled, the horizon burning with the last light of sunset. The sound of justice, she thought, wasn't thunder. It was the slow collapse of false empires. The headlines hit like a hammer. Family business under investigation. Allegations of fraud surface. Mara read each line in silence as rain streaked the cafe window. Her uncle's empire, once untouchable, was cracking open for the world to see. She watched a drop of coffee tremble in her spoon, mirroring the trembling hands of those who once looked down on her. Her phone rang again. Another cousin. She didn't answer. Instead, she opened her father's ledger, running her fingers over the embossed initials. "You wrote it all down," she whispered. "And now thou read every word." By evening, her cousins gathered at her uncle's estate, their voices sharp with fear. "Who leaked it? The bank froze our accounts. This will destroy us." They shouted, blamed, Denied. Mara watched from the gate, unseen, the storm light painting the windows in fractured gold. For years, they had devoured one another in whispers. Now she watched them consume themselves in panic. The lawyer's message buzzed on her phone. "It's time." She smiled faintly. The plan was unfolding exactly as her father had written it. The next morning, she met the lawyer at his office. He placed a single sheet of paper before her, an addendum to the will. Her father had foreseen everything. The clause was simple. Should the company fall under legal review for misconduct, all assets shall revert to the next rightful heir. My daughter, Mara. She exhaled slowly, her pulse steady. They built their fortune on lies, the lawyer said. You will rebuild it with truth. She looked up from the paper, eyes calm. No, she said. I'll rebuild it with silence. That's what they fear most. They came to her one by one, calls, letters, visits. Her aunt in tears, her cousin begging for mercy, her uncle silent with shame. We didn't know. One whispered. You did, she replied simply. You always did. For the first time, their words meant nothing to her. She had already said goodbye long ago at the funeral. Now she was only collecting the echoes. The empire was hers, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the truth standing alone after the lies had burned away. That night, she returned to the seaside house. The storm had passed, leaving the horizon painted in fading lavender. She opened the windows and let the cold air sweep through the rooms. The house felt lighter now, unburdened. She sat at her father's desk and traced her fingers along the grooves carved into the wood, the same marks he had left decades ago. Her phone buzzed again. She turned it face down. Outside, the tide rolled in with the patience of time itself. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to smile, not in triumph but in peace. Morning light spilled across the floors of the old seaside house, now clean, restored, alive. Mara walked slowly through its halls, her fingertips grazing the freshly painted walls. Where once there had been decay, there was now warmth. Framed photographs, shelves lined with her father's books, the faint hum of the sea outside. Each step echoed with memory, but it was no longer grief that filled her. It was completion. She paused at the window where she had once stood clutching his letter, watching storms rage. Now, sunlight shimmered on the waves, soft and forgiving. Her voice was barely a whisper. It's done. That night, the wind rose again, but it wasn't a storm, just the ocean breathing. Mara sat in the parlor by the fire, her father's signet ring catching the flame's reflection. His voice seemed to drift through the crackling wood, the way it had when she was a child. The sea takes, but it gives back what's meant to return. She closed her eyes. For the first time, she let the tears fall freely, not from rage or loss, but from release. The ghosts that once haunted these rooms had finally gone quiet. Lawyer arrived the next morning, coat dusted with salt air. He looked around the house, eyes softening. He'd be proud, he said quietly. Mara smiled. You helped him plan this, didn't you? His silence was answer enough. Finally, he spoke. He wanted to see what they'd do when stripped of everything. He wanted you to see who they were and who you could become. Mara nodded, understanding now. Her father's vengeance had never been about ruin. It had been about truth. Justice had been the inheritance all along. That evening she visited the docks. The place from her father's journals was still there. Rusted cranes, silent warehouses, the sea he had once commanded. She walked along the pier, her boots echoing against the wet wood. In the fading light, she saw her uncle standing at the end, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. It was all for nothing, he said, voice hoarse. Mara stopped a few feet away. No, she answered quietly. It was for me to understand. She didn't shout, didn't accuse. The silence between them said everything. When she turned and walked away, he didn't follow. Later that night, the news broke. Her uncle had resigned. The company stripped from his control. Investigators had found the missing funds, the offshore accounts, the signatures that damned him. Mara didn't celebrate. She stood on the balcony of her father's house, watching the sea shimmer under a rising moon. "Justice," she whispered, "not revenge." The difference mattered. The ring gleamed faintly on her hand, its weight no longer a burden but a bond. She smiled, hearing her father's voice carried by the wind, soft and proud. "You found the truth." The dawn was calm, the kind that comes only after storms have said their last word. Mara carried a small urn to the edge of the cliffs, the ocean below whispering its eternal rhythm. The wind lifted her hair as she opened the lid and let her father's ashes fall into the sea. They swirled in the light, silver against blue. "You're free now," she murmured. The tide answered with a low sigh. For the first time, she didn't feel the ache of loss, only the presence of something larger than grief, something like peace. The sun rose higher, painting the sky gold. Weeks later, the seaside house stood transformed. Fresh paint, open windows, laughter echoing from the halls. Children ran across the wooden floors, the first to find sanctuary in the home she had turned into a refuge. Orphans of families broken by deceit, like hers once was. Mara knelt beside one girl, tracing the carved initials on the desk. "Who were they?" the child asked. Mara smiled softly. "Someone who believed in truth." The girl nodded, satisfied, and ran off. Mara's heart felt lighter than it ever had before. A month later, a local newspaper arrived at her doorstep. The headline read, "Former heiress turns family estate into Hope Foundation." She set the paper down, smiling faintly. In the corner of the article was a small photograph of her father, taken years ago, standing beside the very house that now carried his legacy forward. "You see, Father," she whispered, "you didn't lose everything. You built the beginning." The wind brushed through the curtains as if in answer. That evening, she stood on the shore where her father once taught her to face the sea. The waves lapped at her boots, gentle and constant. "You always said storms teach us who we are," she murmured. In the fading light, she could almost see him standing beside her. Not as a ghost, but as a reflection in her calm. She closed her eyes, letting the sound of the water blend with his memory until they became one. When she opened them again, the horizon stretched, endless and forgiving. Night settled gently over the ocean. Mara sat on the porch, a blanket around her shoulders, watching the stars bloom across the sky. The house behind her glowed softly with the laughter of children and the faint music of a piano, her father's favorite melody. The world had finally quieted. She closed her eyes, a serene smile curving her lips. Vengeance had given way to peace, and in that silence, carried by the wind, came her father's final echo, "You did well, my daughter."